Wheeling Plant Commission meeting for Thursday, February 13th is called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Secretary, would you please take roll?
Commissioner Dorband.
I'm here.
Commissioner Johnson, I am here. Commissioner Powers.
I'm here.
Commissioner Schaaf.
Here.
Commissioner Styling gave prior notice that he would not be here. Commissioner Zangara.
Here.
And Chairman Raffato.
Here. Mr. Jennings, any changes to the agenda?
No, we have no changes tonight.
Thank you. Citizen concerns and comments? Consent items, we have none. Items for review, we have none. Approval of minutes, January 9, 2014. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Approval of minutes, January 16th. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And January 23rd, approval for minutes. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
On to other business. Workshop regarding amendment to Title 21 signs. Mr. Jennings.
Thank you. At our last workshop, we had discussed a handful of potential changes to the sign code. What we've done so far is take a first stab at fleshing some of that out. This is not something that you have seen yet. This is what was discussed, just sort of giving you a progress update. So I'd like to just go through it from start to finish. The highlighted areas from the last meeting, we're going to go back through them just very briefly and give you a quick status update on the types of changes we're looking at, and then we can move on to the landscape subcommittee. The sign code, let me just scroll down to the first series of changes. And there we go. I think the first, actually the commission had requested something else. I'll go back up and just go a little slower through it. That was in this. The commission had requested that the date of drawings be required more clearly, so we've added this to just a statement that the date of a drawing must be clearly shown on the plan. I think the next series of recommendations that we had related to industrial signage. Oh, great, thanks, Adobe. The main issue was the changing land use in industrial areas causing a need for a different type of signage. And what we were suggesting here, sorry, it's a long way away. Before we get to that, there was a suggestion to go back to the streetscape subcommittee recommendation. If you look at this text, this is what the commission had agreed on during the public hearing when we originally changed this, and the suggestion would be to replace that with this percentage here. So this segment here from evergreen shrubs down to the end would be replaced with 10% deciduous shrubs, 10% dwarf evergreens, 40% flowers, annuals, ever blooming, and seasonal perennials with interest, and 40% miscellaneous. Is that more or less the commission's desire with that?
Commissioner Dorby, and I'm directing it to you because of your knowledge of landscaping and flowers. Why would we take away the 30% of winter interest? Is there, because I always think of, when we get into the winter, how dreary some of these things look. Will this new percentage provide that interest, if you will, in the winter months?
Well, those are the figures that we got when I went to Lori. So I was going by her, because I was thinking it should be more, but she said, you know, sometimes what we consider a small percentage really is bigger than it appears. So what her rationale exactly is, I don't remember. I have to admit that. But those are the figures we took from what I had gotten from her.
Are these percentages based on square footage or
Yes.
number of plants?
This is a square footage.
I mean, we can change it to anything you want, obviously. I mean, those were only the figures that when we presented that packet to the trustees, that's what was in there.
Well, what do you think? Do you think these are good numbers, the 10%, 10, 40, and 40?
Well, you know, I suppose you can adjust it any way you, I guess you think is, if you think that's, you're saying that you want.
Oh, I'm not.
No, I'm
There's
just
this space,
trying
I'm
to.
not thinking anything. I'm just, I just want to, you know, you have that
Well-
a little flair that I don't
Well,
have.
the 30% of winter interest, is that what you're referring to?
Right,
Okay, so the deciduous would be 10%,
Right.
and the flower and perennials, you know, that stuff's, you're still going to have your 30% of that. So a third of whatever you're looking at basically is going to have winter interest.
Okay.
Does that sound maybe better looking at it that way?
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Because if you say, if it's almost a third of it,
Right. Okay. That's fine. Yep. Understand. I'm okay with it. Yeah.
I didn't follow that. I've got 10% dwarf evergreens. I didn't follow the connection to 30% on that.
40,
What?
30 is 100, isn't it? No?
What?
Nothing.
So the general, is the consensus to swap them out then?
Well, okay, maybe I should ask it this way. What piqued my interest in the yellow section was the words winter interest, and that's absent in the blue section. It reads evergreen shrubs or other plants with winter interest, which was 30%. Right now, I'm looking at this, and you really only have 10% of dwarf evergreens, which would be considered winter interest.
And which would be under the snow this year.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So is that, I guess, where did we get the term winter interest? And does a 10%, so a 20% drop from 30 to 10% of winter interest shrubs, is that good enough?
Well, we had added, the staff started with the blue section, which came from the streetscape subcommittee.
Right, yep.
We looked at, we had a little concern with the 40% miscellaneous.
Yeah.
So we were trying to bring it down a little bit and, you know,
So why can't we up the dwarf evergreen? And why is it why is it specific to dwarf evergreen? That's an interesting term.
if this came from Lori, my guess is that her background in landscaping would distinguish between
Sure.
evergreen
Good point.
trees and dwarf evergreen, so maybe that's the terminology that's used in the
Yeah.
biz.
Why don't we,
It seems like it's, the dwarf evergreens would almost be a ground cover.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
yes. Oh,
I think dwarf evergreens are used for a lot of these low signs like you get in the industrial area, the monument signs. Certainly if you have a sign that goes above the ground, you can put anything taller, but how many times have we seen, we've designed landscaping underneath the sign and haven't met a few years, it's grown over the sign.
Right.
And as far as winter interest, just doesn't have to be, something that's evergreen. It could be burning bush with red twigs. It could be any kind of a bush that loses its leaves and has got twigs. That's winter interest according to landscapers. Instead of where you'd have perennials or annuals where you just cut them down at the ground, bush, sticks sticking on the ground in the wintertime creates interest, so I'm told.
Well, I went back to what was presented to the trustees, and it was an example of the signscape suggestion. 10% was deciduous shrubs, 10% was dwarf evergreens, 40% was flowers, annuals, ever-blooming, and seasonal perennials with interest, and then 40% may be miscellaneous. Now, that's what's written here.
Miscellaneous could be a tough one.
Yeah.
It seems like the yellow highlighted area makes more sense.
The yellow highlighted what?
The yellow highlighted percentages,
Keep it the same?
keep it the same.
Well, there had to be some rhyme or reason into what trustee Brady indicated is the dwarf evergreen, at least you're specific, especially around freestanding signs. Then you have that. I was looking at it more from a perspective of color and the reduction from 30% to 10% in that type of winter interest. What if we bump the 10% up to 20% of the area and brought miscellaneous down to 30%?
But do you just want to leave it as dwarf evergreens or dwarf evergreens and other plants with winter interest? To trustee Brady's point that it's not just evergreens.
That's true. How about if we had that? How if we do that? Can we add that? 20% dwarf evergreens or other plants with winter interest, 20%, and drop down the 40 to 30? Because in our original percentages, we didn't even have a miscellaneous.
Well, we had the remaining 20% maybe planted with the above categories
Oh,
or
okay.
filled with ground cover.
You're right, yeah.
So basically, if we left it alone, change this to 20 and this to 30, swap these two numbers.
Well, but I believe that the dwarf evergreen should be, if we just said, if it read, following requirements, dwarf evergreen shrubs or other plants with winter interest, 20%. Deciduous shrubs, 10, flowering perennials, 40, and the remaining, okay, I can't add now, 30, 60, yeah. No, we're high. If we made, if we made that 20%, yeah, 20 and 10 and 40 and then 30.
So just swap the
What
20
happens
to
if you
30.
just went, instead of adding that 20, just put 10% winter interest? Because if you add it to the dwarf evergreens, we have to, someone just does 20% of dwarf evergreens.
So 10% evergreen shrubs, 20% other winter interest?
Yeah. But adding the word dwarf. And this is just in context to freestanding signs. Right.
Okay.
Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds fair to me.
Looking for a definition, but I can't.
It wasn't helpful.
No.
Could I ask a question? Do we have like watering standards for the plants within the freestanding sign? Because with 40% of flowers in the summer, some of that stuff's gonna get stressed. Do we have watering code related to vegetation around freestanding signs?
Only as it comes up on the site plan reviews, does it tend to be an issue. On a new site, it would tend to get irrigated.
Irrigated,
Okay.
existing, no.
So the 20% is going to be in the dwarf evergreens, and you're changing the miscellaneous?
So I think what Commissioner Zangaro was suggesting was here, where the evergreen shrubs, we would add 10% dwarf evergreen shrubs, 20% other plants with winter interest, knock this out. So this 30 is going to be split between 10% evergreen shrubs, 20% other plants with winter interest. And then keep the rest of it, because it's the remaining is fairly similar.
Well, are we forcing them to come up with 20% of other plants with winter interest by wording it that way?
Color. That's what you need, color.
Right. Again, say what you had written again.
10% dwarf evergreens, 20% other plants with winter interest.
And then it would be
Then the rest of it.
10% deciduous shrubs, 40%. Shrubs. 40 flowers.
Andrew, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In all these areas like this and some of the other islands and that there, are you limiting mulch? And then back when we were working very hard and trying to get something going, it seemed like everybody kind of conformed to certain things, but instead of planting ground cover or the sort, they put about half of the whole thing in mulch and say, well, it's a ground cover. And it's not, you know. I think it's important, you have to, you have to allow them, because of the maintenance and the mowing and everything else, a certain percentage or portion of it to be like a stone or a bark ground cover, but they will do the whole thing, they'll put a tree in and the rest of it is ground cover, and you say, okay, I'm at the code.
Yeah, I think that it's something that's come up, and I don't know that we ever really resolved how to address it in terms of the mulch to plant ratio.
Something, while we're doing this, it'd be something to look at some certain point.
I suppose we could add something that
Sure.
sort of note.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
Okay. Any other items in that section?
No, I think we should go with what we talked about, 10% dwarf and 20% winter interest. Yep. Do it.
The next section down relates to our discussion of how to handle industrial multi-tenant buildings. So one idea that we've been working with here is to remove, separate shopping centers from the other multi-tenant buildings. So first step of that is just label this first section as shopping centers. And the suggestion that we were experimenting with here is all other multi-tenant buildings. And the idea here was to encourage the consolidation of directional signage into a single directory, issue a permit for it, require review of it, get the, not necessarily remove the exemption, but clearly guide the landlords and the tenants this direction by allowing them to, and you'll see here how we've worked with that, is if it's a smaller sign, so if it can fit under this 32 square foot, so it's a relatively small sign. The purpose of it is to identify the businesses as you approach the driveway. If it's a smaller sign, maximum of 4 square feet per tenant, then they can be relatively close to the road, 2 feet off the property line. They can waive the landscape requirement. And then any other, if they go above all of that, they just get referred straight back to the shopping center requirements. So the purpose of this is to establish a post and panel directory type of sign that would allow these multi-tenant industrial buildings to provide some type of signage. As we have more and more businesses that require the public to visit them in these industrial areas.
Why would we waive the sign landscaping requirement?
Well, the idea was that these are going to be relatively small. If you had 2 tenants, for example, this would be an 8 square foot sign, comparable to a directional sign. So the idea was they can request waiving the landscape requirement if there is landscaping near the sign. So if you've got a nicely landscaped front area already on the building, that you would be able to argue that there is adequate landscaping visible from the street. Just an idea.
So the sign would be separated from possibly the landscaped area? Is that what you're saying? So the sign would be sitting basically free floating in the grass or whatever, and the landscaping might not be, we might not see it till it came up to the building? Is that the way I'm understanding it?
Right, the sign itself would not be landscaped if they can illustrate that there's landscaping near it.
I mean, the type of sign you're talking about, is that something like a Starbucks, like a drive-through sign, like a small monument sign? Would that be considered like a directional sign?
This is an office building or an industrial building that has a tenant or some number of tenants that need to be identified. Maybe not every tenant in the building requires any sort of identification, but a few of them do. And in lieu of having 3 or 4, right now, a directional sign up to 6 square feet is exempt in an industrial area. So if you had 4 tenants in an industrial building, each one theoretically could put out its own little sign, one right next to the other. So what we're trying to do is, in place of that clutter, consolidate them into one, give them a legal yet attractive way to display their identification. Recognizing, of course, that some of these industrial landlords may not necessarily want to put in a lot of money for a shopping center style sign.
It's because this is going to dictate like a certain, almost like a certain construction or different parameters to what the sign may look like, correct?
So it would come in for review, as any other sign would. It would require uniform background color, uniform font color, so there would be some criteria assigned to the sign. One thing that we were trying to address with this is that in some of these buildings, you'll have one tenant will be the first tenant who needs identification. No other tenant in the industrial building has any need for identification. And so what we're suggesting here is that the application form clearly and explicitly authorize this with the knowledge that the single tenant, if it becomes a second tenant, is going to have to conform to this, just to make sure that the landlords are very aware of what they're signing off on.
And this would be something that's permanent, right? This would not be
These are-
something you
these
can
are
just pull
permanent
out in the
signs.
ground and,
These are permanent signs.
okay.
Are you, Andrew, are you talking, let's say, like the old ACO building? It's got 4 tenants in it now?
Something to that effect. So it would come in for an approval, everything would be,
On one sign?
I'm sorry?
Well, they have, that's what they have, the
Yes.
one single sign is, I think it's 3 or 4 businesses in there that are listed on there. No trouble, I never went in there, but how do you, if they only have the one sign, how do you know where you're going when you get in there?
Well, they have a series of signs if you enter the property that direct you beyond that.
It's a wolf and hints.
I still, do you determine whether the landscaping will be waived?
No, they would request it from the commission at the time that they're
Oh, okay.
coming in. We would give them advice. I mean, we would take a look at anybody who would come in for this. We don't anticipate it being a weekly occurrence, so we would go take a look at it and
What if we took that out? Landscape. So if we took that out, we would require landscaping for this type of sign.
yeah, the rationale behind what was suggested here was just that the alternative, as it is right now, costs the landlord $0. If a tenant wants to put up an exempt sign, they don't get a permit from us, they just come in and they just do it. And they may call us and double check and say, can I do this? And the code says yes, so we say yes, but we're just anticipating that, right now, people are getting by with temporary signs. The temporary sign code provision allows them to keep doing it every so often. We're just anticipating that that will end, and they're going to want some sort of permanent identification.
I think going to a permanent sign kind of cleans
It up.
things up too.
Comments? Anyone?
And we can certainly wipe that out. I'm not saying we can't. It was just a,
I'm just looking for comments from anybody. Is everybody okay with this verbiage here for multi-tenant buildings? Okay, go for it. Okay.
okay. Let's see. The next item that we were looking at changes on, excuse me. We've had some difficulty in managing our temporary signs. Part of the issue is that once a temporary sign receives a permit, everyone assumes that it's just okay to display any type of temporary sign, and it's a constant struggle to track down what is permitted and what isn't. So what we're trying to do is create a system similar to what we had previously intended, but rein it in so that it's easier to identify what has a permit, what doesn't, reduce some of the ability to repeat and run signs consecutively. We've had some complaints that some of those signs that ran their display period consecutively were becoming an eyesore. They were deteriorating, they were weathering poorly. So the idea of this is to try to define and standardize this a little bit more, still allowing most of the same types of signs, public interest, special event, but more clearly defining what each one of those really means. So, for example, excuse me here while I just scroll down. For example, the grand opening signs, we've had complaints that they're permitted to run too long. So this would reduce right now that you could have up to 180 days, which is 6 months of grand opening. Our suggestion here is to bring that down to 60. So it would be longer than your typical special event, but not 6 months. We're taking some of these square footage items and standardizing them and moving them up, so all temporary signs would have the same regulations. You've got a maximum square footage. If you would like to divide that square footage among 4 signs instead of 1, you can go up to 4 signs. This is just based on the pattern of sign permits that we have issued.
Okay.
Special event. So this is probably the section that we're suggesting the biggest change to. Again, limiting the display period to a maximum of 28 days clearly, and then getting back to the idea of separating the display periods. We have had a practice in the past of issuing a business a permit that is good for a year, and it leaves it to the business then to display in accordance with the regulations. What we're suggesting here is to get a better handle on this. Each instance of display would be a permit. So if you'd like to display in the spring, although it's going to be irritating for some businesses, they would have to reapply. That gives us the ability to check, make sure that it's been long enough, and they can display again. Some of the same items are repeated here. The other change that we're trying to implement.
Has that been an issue?
Which, the display?
Yeah. For
Yes,
these special events?
the issue of,
Well, you said that right now you give somebody a permit for a year, and then they can have as many special events as they want throughout the year and put up things.
it's not that they can have as many, it's that you've got once the permit is out, it's out, and the only way to go back and check and make sure that they're complying with it is almost on a complaint basis. And by then, it's been 4 months of display. So the idea of this is that no single temporary sign can run its display period consecutively. Whereas one business could, under the current rules, one business could get permission to run their year's worth of signs in maybe 2 chunks. Somebody else does it in 4 chunks. So the impact on that particular shopping center is that somebody always has a temporary sign out.
Is there a fee every time they do this?
We're proposing that there would be. There is a fee. We would issue a permit for the year's worth of displays, so they would have a seasonal display, a spring, a summer, a fall, and a winter. They'd apply for it, and then that's the last time we'd see them for a year. So what we're proposing is that they have to come back each season if they do want to have a display. And we're coupling that with, although this is supposed to be done already, one issue that we've also had is that the signs, once we do see them, have nothing to do with the event that we had originally thought they would have. So we're suggesting that they clearly identify the special event. So you can't just display the name of the business right by the street with nothing else on it.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
The vinyl banners, is that considered a temporary sign?
Yes.
And then, so they're going to be limited to 32 square feet with that?
Yes.
The other cases where we had the banners on the string, like for some grand openings, we saw is that considered a sign, or what is that considered? Can we limit that?
That's the next section we're getting
Okay.
into. It's under prohibited.
Okay.
There's an exception. It's kind of an unusual regulation. I can just scroll down to that right now.
Does it, just,
Yep.
why don't we just stay on that for now, for the one we were at, and then we'll get to what
Okay.
Commissioner Powers wanted. Does this almost make it unwieldy, though? Coming in for permits all the time?
I think we're trying to find the balance between enforceability and ease for the businesses. As it is
That's
right
true.
now, one of the problems that we have is that we've got businesses who are conforming to the regulations, who are at a competitive disadvantage. It's the businesses who are stretching the regulations that are
Sure.
that are
Sure.
taking advantage of it, I would say. So what we're trying to do is strike a balance so that we can more efficiently, we only have so many inspectors, we only have so many hours, and as it is right now, there are businesses who just aren't aware of the rules, and they see signs. We're actively in court with somebody, and we have businesses all the time say, well, he did it. Well, yes, we're in court with that business. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a better handle on what is permitted and what isn't, so our inspectors, when they're driving around, know what they're doing.
Any other comments about this section?
On temporary signs, aren't they issued by the Director of Community Development?
They're issued, the Director of Community Development issues them. We, as the employees of the Director of Community Development,
Okay.
actually issue them.
Okay. So they don't have to come before Plan Commission or anything?
No.
You gotta make
It's
a calendar or something,
administrative.
yeah. It's always been a nightmare. It's easy to get them up and never get them down.
Right, okay, so let's go on. So now to Commissioner Powers' question.
So the Commissioner Powers' question was this. Under prohibited signs, there's an exception for special events that we're suggesting should just be removed. Having an exception to something that's otherwise prohibited causes, I think, some confusion. I'm not sure that we need that. When we have issued permits under this, we have received complaints because people are not aware that this exception exists. So I don't know that there's a need to exempt or to provide an exception for a prohibited sign.
Makes sense. Okay.
Does this also include, I don't know, is part of the sign code, or is it another part of the code? The businesses that display like the neon open signs, and they light it up when it's open and turn off when it's closed. Is that addressed in our sign
They're
code?
considered exempt,
okay.
but there's some limitations to the exemption.
Okay.
While we're in this section, I would say that the prohibition of banners, probably take that out because we've got clearly permitted banners.
Okay. Yep.
Had not noticed that.
Are you reviewing all signs? Window signs too?
Or do we review them?
Huh?
Do we review windows?
I know, is this part of, does this review include window signs, et cetera?
Sure.
Have we ever done anything about window sign? I know that there's a lot of violations about the percentage of coverage on them, but, I don't think that's as bad as the fact that there's no uniformity to some of these. One of the businesses that really kind of shine in the way they do their window signs is AutoZone. They have a sign in every window, and they're all uniform, all the same, they're very, very neat looking. Then you go by the liquor store, kitty corner from that, and it's a mess. And even mom and pa's is a mess. They stick signs all over the window, no uniformity, no nothing. Maybe, could we do, I wonder if you can do that, if there's such a way we can do it, that any sign put in the window's got to be of uniform color, size, or placement or something.
That was one of the issues that was brought up at our last workshop. We don't have a good solution for it yet. We'll keep looking. I don't know other than to just keep looking at other codes to see who else addresses that. But it's not something we have a solution for yet.
All right, thank you.
Andrew, can you go up a little bit on this one? Where you had the strikeout?
This thing?
Okay. Is that the way it's going to read, or are you going to reword it? It reads kind of funny.
The
It says,
strikeout?
or similar devices that move blinking.
I think I'd probably just leave the semicolon in there.
Okay. That move, semicolon,
Yeah.
blinking, is that what you're going to, okay, that'll read better, okay.
The other items that came up from this section, there was a request to note off-premises signs. They're noted here, but our suggestion is just to kind of highlight it by adding the word off-premises signs as sort of a heading for billboards or other signs which advertise businesses. This was just a grammatical correction. Last thing that we had on this was a request to take a look at gaming. What we have done with that is under the special use, we've added just a draft here for businesses, which would allow video gaming. All signs pertaining to video gaming shall be subject to the following: just a maximum of one sign, and we use the regulation of the 25% rule, which was the rule that came from the electronic window signs. So is there any other suggestion of what to do with this one?
When you say electronic window, you talking about the reader board sign, Andrew?
The percentage, the 25% is the maximum size of a electric window sign. So we just took a number that appears elsewhere in the code.
And only one sign related to video gaming
That's
is allowed.
we were just throwing something out for the purpose of discussion and see if there was something else that.
Because it looks like every different video game out there has a neon sign to go with it.
So maybe this will be good.
I just wish there
They'll
was
have to
some
pick
way
which one they want to advertise.
of not advertising it like it's being done now, but there isn't any, I don't see any way of getting around it. I'm just afraid we're going to see all these places with gaming, we're going to see these signs up there like that. I wish we could limit the size or not have them be neon or something so they're not so obtrusive.
You want to add?
I mean, I don't know that there is anything we can do about it. I think we're kind of stuck by,
You could add that they not be electric, and see what the board thinks.
No, I think this is a good start, what you got there.
But here we're saying the business is actually only limited to one sign, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine.
I agree with Commissioner Johnson. Let's start here and see what that does. Are these things retroactive?
I'd have to double check that. I mean, it's, when you're talking about a special use there, I think you have some ability to apply it to all the new ones for sure, but
Could we tie it,
yeah, we could take a look at that. I'm not sure what the answer is.
are they required, I know there's probably annual licensing for state licensing annually for these video places. Is there a village license that goes with those?
No,
No, that's too bad.
there's a liquor license.
You tie it to the liquor license, couldn't we?
Well, it could be a trigger for us to look, certainly. They come up for renewal every year. If
Yep.
they come up for renewal, we could certainly add that to part of the renewal, is just ensure that they conform to the sign code. I can double check that. I mean, when you talk about continuation of a non-conforming feature, it's a little bit unusual that this is also kind of related to an exempt form of signage. So I'm not sure how you deal with that.
Well, if you
I
could
have to-
investigate,
yeah,
that'd be
I'll
great.
take a look. I will.
Okay, good, thank you.
And that was the last item that we had. Are there any other items for our next time around that we should add to our list?
I just wanted to know about electronic reader board signs hanging inside of an establishment, but facing out. Is that addressed in our code somewhere?
It is, it would fall under, let's see. Would likely fall under these sort of, the prohibited blinking, flashing signs. The window sign regulation does limit also, so there's an exemption for window signage.
Okay.
But it can't be blinking, moving, et cetera.
Yeah, because I know of at least one in the village. I don't know how we handle that.
Well, if you have a comment about a specific sign,
We can always have a property maintenance inspector take a look at it. Just
Okay.
let it- Send me an email and
All right.
I'll talk to them.
anything else on the signs?
I just want to thank Andrew and Brooke for doing this, because it seems to me that about once a year, we go over these sign codes and clean them up and tweak them, and I appreciate the fact that
Yep.
you stay on
Yeah.
top of it.
Thank you.
Next item,
Okay, let me switch to the other file real quick.
landscape subcommittee discussion.
The last landscape subcommittee discussion, the way that we ended it was, the planning commission as a whole actually attended that meeting and agreed that the next step would be to assemble the comments from the landscape subcommittee and insert it into a format as a request for proposals. The idea behind this was to, recognizing that our staff is limited in terms of time and expertise on this particular issue, we would need, in all likelihood, an outside consultant to assist in this. However, we have absolutely no idea what a project like this might cost, which makes it difficult to request approval from the village board. So the idea is put together the tasks and get a cost estimate for each task, and a cost estimate if all the tasks were to be completed, get a cost estimate for the entire project. That way you can submit proposals to the village board. If it's an item, if the project as a whole is something that could be added to next year's budget, this would give us that knowledge without an idea of the cost for each one of these tasks. My opinion is that we can't really do much toward completing it. So this would be a really good next step. So what I'd like to do is just sort of go through and just discuss it as we, let me make this a little bit bigger. So some of this is standard. What we've added here is the basic description. The Village Planning Commission has developed a list of issues that these proposals are expected to address. The Commission has divided the project into 4 main tasks. Number 1, complete the requested code revision. Number 2, develop a new code appendix consisting of a detailed plant catalog with graphics and information about the plants. Number 3, establish a zoning overlay to require enhanced landscaping along major commercial corridors. And number 4, create a user-friendly manual for businesses and property owners utilize in developing quality landscape plans. So that's the synopsis of the project. Some of these items are standard language here. Just what's required to be included in each submittal. Since you don't see this regularly, we can just go through it pretty quickly here. We have them summarize their understanding of the project, making sure that we've got an apples to apples comparison. If we get 3 or 4 proposals, one of them is a quarter of the price of the other ones, you want to make sure that they are giving you back the scope of work that you expect. Schedule, we give them an idea of what we need, and then we ask, based on their staff level, what kind of schedule they believe they can complete the project in. You look for their experience, try to get them to highlight anything that is similar to what you're asking them to do. References cost estimate. In this case, we're asking for a cost estimate that is both the overall project and then an itemized cost, assuming that each item is completed as an independent project. And the idea of that is this may not be 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. This could be, as a package, these items may actually give you a discount off of the total. So what we're trying to get from them is, if they were to do all of these projects and could assign staff to it, can they come in at a lower cost than if we had to break up these projects separately? Any questions up to that point?
So the bottom line, it's an à la carte kind of,
Well, yeah, what we're trying to get is a couple of things. Is if there's a single item that the Planning Commission is looking for that is extremely expensive, I think it's important to know that. For example, this graphic appendix, if that is 70% of the project cost, and you can put that to a later date, ask the board to budget for it, and the other items as a total get you the code that you would like, with the requirements that you'd like, at a lower rate, and you don't need to budget a year in advance, maybe you can separate it out that way. The next section of this is a recap of everything that came out of the landscape, and we've modified this slightly. But for the most part, this is straight from what the landscape subcommittee was looking for. So would you like to just go through these, each task, so that we make sure our understanding is good? So the first task, code revision. This is what we've talked about, consolidating the code, taking the 4 different titles and putting them into one. Consolidate the landscaping sections from the zoning code, sign code, subdivision code, and tree vegetation into a single document. The other items here are identify the triggers for requiring landscape plan review, establishing procedures for updating plans, establishing a connection to enforcement actions, consideration of best practices, and establishing clear requirements for a plan submittal. So that I think pretty well summarizes what the landscape subcommittee had identified as the wish list for a future code. Is there anything that does not seem to be on the list? And again, this is just the meat of the code.
Yep.
The plant catalog appendix. So the idea of this is that it would be a reference similar to the bicycle parking regulations in the zoning code. There would be an appendix to this code, which would include information, sun and shade, salt tolerance, growth rate, proper initial planting size, proper spacing, maintenance and experience level, by which we mean, is this a plant that's easily maintained, or do you need some advanced knowledge of landscaping to take care of it? Maximum size, acceptable alternative plants, watering needs, whether measures are needed to address invasive tendencies, photographs of these plants by season. What we're looking for, and this is sort of the staff addition to this, is what we're trying to do is get this organized by type to make it work with the landscape manual or brochure, so that those two items, if they're both done, that they are related to one another, so that somebody who's using the landscape manual might get referred back to the appendix. If there's a need to separate them, they still work independently. Let's see. The overlay. What we're looking at here would be an assessment of the character of 4 major commercial corridors. We had picked 4. The Planning Commission subcommittee, I don't think, identified specifically what we were talking about. So we just put a number in so that anybody who's responding to the RFP knows that they're talking about distinct areas. If there's, as we move forward, maybe we go ahead and pick exactly which ones we're talking about. So if a consultant were to call me and ask, they want to go look at Milwaukee Avenue, I would say it's Milwaukee Avenue, it's Dundee Road, it's Lake Cook Road. So maybe having an idea, I think, would be good. The next piece here, if you look at this space available for landscaping, visibility, et cetera, those are ideas I think that came out of the streetscape subcommittee as much as the landscape subcommittee. This was Commissioner Styland's, trying to come up with ways to compare the areas so that any regulations for a specific area are tailored to that character. And this is us trying to convey that. Next item, B, develop requirements intended to enhance landscaping along these corridors. And then C, requirements should be related to land use and character. I think that covered most of what was desired out of the overlay. Are there any other comments on it? And then the last item, the landscaping manual. Again, identifying to anybody who's going to respond to the RFP that what we're looking for is something to be used by the public, the businesses, property owners, landscapers. Should go without saying that we'd like for it to be in electronic format, but the idea here is to also in this manual repeat the requirements of the code with respect to what a complete application would be. That's up at in the wish list for the code. And if both of these items, the landscape manual and the appendix, are done, they would cross-reference one another. You may be able to input what it is you're looking for in terms of certain criteria for a plant, and the manual would refer back to this graphic appendix, and you could find it. I think one of the other ideas that the staff was looking at here is, as this evolves, by having potentially all of these things relate to one another, it could help us deal with the substitution question. We do from time to time deal with substitutions, and having an appendix like this identify in advance what the acceptable substitutions are. There's no question of, hey, we have to take this back to the Planning Commission, we have to take it back to the board. If the nursery doesn't have it, here are 4 plants that we've already deemed to be acceptable in this location. So with that, the rest of this is, again, sort of boilerplate RFP language. We're looking for just identifying to them how we're going to compare the proposals. Then the schedule here has not been updated, obviously. Any other comments or questions on this?
So, yeah, on the criteria, you prepare a summary of all proposals for review by the Plan Commission and Village Board. Why just a summary?
Well, what we would do, and what we've done in the past, is it depends on how much they give us. Sometimes the background information, we're electronic now, usually, but the initial item that comes in is on paper. Once we get them, we're allowed to open them at a certain time. When we open them, we'll get an electronic version back. What we'll do is take the basic summary of each one. Cost, what their experience level is, maybe a couple of sample projects, list it out, and then we'll include the proposals behind that. So we'll have a summary and then the whole proposal so the Plan Commission can look at it.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of comments, please.
Sure.
Are we going to include a strong maintenance replacement program in this landscape section? And, you know, that's where I think it belongs there. If something has been approved and planted and a year or two later, half the plants die.
I think that's covered under here. This it is one of the items that the subcommittee had talked about is enforcement and making sure that the expectations for enforcement are included in the code as they are right now sort of scattered around. I think the idea was during the consolidation, the connection between the code and the enforcement of the code be made very clear, a fine structure,
Right.
et cetera.
The maintenance, that would, you come under the maintenance, you know, if they're not maintaining it, it dies, you got to replace it with the exact same product that they was originally approved. I don't know if this means anything or not, but in under your code revisions, under E, the consideration of best practices, if the guy can't or don't want to put irrigation in there, you're going to let him put native plants. Native plants can be a lot of weeds. I've seen some of these gardens, they're not the prettiest. I'm not saying that somebody would do that, but it could happen.
I think the idea of this was that if most of the sections of our code haven't been touched in decades, so I think the idea was that if there are practices in the industry that have evolved, that the Plan Commission had identified that a desire to consider best practices as part of this, if there's something that we should be doing in terms of, I think the question was further emphasizing that plants from this zone should be planted. I think the idea here is that.
Okay. Yeah, someone's a little more drought tolerant, I suppose. But then, you know, again, when we first started really getting kind of bearing down on landscaping, if they could, they water them. And a lot of people back then, when they started planting their flower gardens out in the front, their annual flower gardens, they take the hose out there and did it. Quite a few of them. Another thing too is you talk about, you know, the plans and when you what is required to get approval on it, whatever the case may be coming before you. Please make sure that they have the plans. Don't send it to the village board with. They'll send the plans later, and staff will review them because you're the staff, Andrew. You're only one guy. Maybe you and your assistant. And who's going to really sit down and overlook it? I thought it'd be a great idea if the forester, once she gets back to running the forestry division, could do it. But she's going to be under the same thing. We're all short-handed. Isn't it better if these guys, you know, sure, everybody's in a rush, and it's going to get worse because as soon as the money starts shaking loose, they're going to be lining up at the door to come in here and get their plans approved. They're not going to wait a week because they don't have their landscape plans. They're going to ask you to waive that, and we'll work on it later. No, we want it now.
You're saying for the RFP?
Yes, whatever it is. The RFP, the special use, no, I'm not talking about here, yeah.
No, not this.
I'm talking about, you know, make sure that the verb it's in the landscape codes that must be accompanied by the recommendation from the Plan Commission. If they don't have it before the Plan Commission at that hearing, it doesn't get approved.
We've had discussions about that, Trustee Brady, a lot lately.
Yeah.
And it has been it has been discussed, and we've talked about, putting dates on all the plans, so we know what's going to you, the board, and ensuring that really what we reviewed and approved is what was going to you. Now, some of the questions around that were, for instance, if we put a condition in our approval saying that they have to make these 4-inch caliper trees instead of the 3.
That's enforceable, yeah.
Yeah, that's enforceable, and they update the plan before it gets to you, we have to somehow know that.
Yeah.
That's just an example. So,
Yeah, what we actually haven't had a chance to put this into action yet, but the idea that Chairman Rufato and I had talked about is right at the point in the meeting where the Planning Commission is getting ready to vote on a recommendation, what we would do is explicitly separate the conditions of approval into, I think we had talked about the physical changes and then operational. We would go through the physical changes to the plans and have an explicit discussion about what to do about it, so that if we have for example, there's a tree, we are going to take this tree and it's going to become a maple tree.
Yeah.
If the Plan Commission as a whole understands that condition and says, we acknowledge that this tree, by the time it goes to the board, is going to now be a maple tree instead of an ash tree, that we would be directed as a staff to make that change before it goes to the board. But if there's a condition that says, move the building, anything that isn't extremely clear, that it would have to come back, the item would be continued.
Well, basically, it happened, in a lot of developers don't put much stock in the landscaping. That's just a small part of their development. Or maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if we're going to get serious about the appearance of our community and want to make sure that the landscaping is improved and more aesthetically pleasing, then it's got to be part of the whole overall process. And so many times you guys haven't even seen the landscape plans, and it gets sent to us for approval with the pretense that at some time the developer will get the landscape plan and it'll be reviewed by staff or whomever and follow later. That's dangerous. That's very dangerous, because like I say, Andrew and Brooke get busy. Who's going to sit down and review an entire plan? In a lot of instances, in a small version, okay, maybe you can get away with it. But some of these other people that come in with these projects, it could be very intimidating, because there is a lot of landscaping. And it's ideal if you get the plans changed, because that's the thing that the people out in the field that are doing the project end up with the plans. They don't get the notes. We can say, okay, 4-inch caliper and everything else. At some point, the permit plan should have all that stuff on there, so that you hand it to a contractor and say, here's your approved plans. He's got the right information. It happened to me in Buffalo Grove. I cut down 40 trees that I wasn't supposed to cut down because I didn't have the right information. That's how simple that can happen. And I don't know. I think you're doing the right thing here with this separate landscape thing, but put everything in there that they have to do. Let the developer know, if you don't show up with your landscape plan, don't bother showing up. Simple as that. Unless it's going to be a multi-meeting deal where you can bring it back to second meeting or something. And one last thing. These are just suggestions. You don't have to take them up, but I've sat up there for a few years and had all the experiences that you guys have. And now had them back then. Nothing ever changes. It's always the same. One last thing. Lori is going to be back soon, hopefully, as our forester. And this code is her Bible. She can use it to however she wants. I hope, now you're going to have, according to what I think something I read in your proposal, the contractor is supposed to, or the engineer, or whatever you call him, that's going to design this landscape ordinance, is going to have 4 workshops with staff and liaison. I hope Lori's involved in them. So she hears what these guys are saying, or she might key on something that, that they are not thinking properly, or give her a chance to get some input. She's very good at trees and intolerance and what succeeds, what doesn't succeed. That's all I have. Other than that, you guys this is great. I'm glad to see it happening. Thank you.
I have a question about about the selection process. You know, that the subcommittee put a lot of time and effort into that. Can we have somebody from that subcommittee, one person, if there are consultant interviews going on, can we have somebody sit in on those?
I'm trying to think of where,
I mean, because all we're seeing is the summary. And Commissioner Dorband has put a lot of effort into this. And just to review the summary without really getting into the meat of, you know, listening to what they say, if there are interviews, you know, if there are similar ones, you know, we might only get one. Then it's pretty easy for us to interview.
so the commission representative listed here under the schedule could also be part of that. I don't know of any reason why, excuse me, I don't know any reason why you couldn't have that same commission representative be
Okay.
involved in it.
That'd be great. Are there anything?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. To Andrew and Brooke, thank you so much for attending our meetings and getting us this far. It's great. Appreciate all your hard work and listening to us and helping us prioritize a list and bring your experience to give us suggestions and come this far. And we'll see where this gets us, but I appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I would echo exactly what Steve said as well.
And just because the rest of us don't say anything, don't assume that we think you did a terrible job. You guys do a great job. Thank you.
So my next item, if I could, we have, for next week's meeting, we had a...
Your next other business.
I'm
I'm sorry, yes,
For
okay.
next week's meeting, we had a petitioner, we had to tell them, your landscape plan isn't ready, so don't bother showing up.
There you go.
So our item for next week is not happening. When we had, at this point, I don't think we're quite ready to re-workshop either of these two items. So I would suggest canceling it unless there's an alternate suggestion for a meeting.
Comments? No, we're fine. That's fine. I'd rather have workshops where we're prepared and we have some, as you normally do, solid presentations that we can walk through. So that's fine. Anything else for other business?
I believe that's it for me. Thank you.
So, Commissioner Dorband,
Nothing, thank you.
Commissioner Zangara,
Nothing.
Commissioner Johnson,
Nothing.
Commissioner Powers,
Nothing.
and Commissioner Schaaf.
Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing. Okay, and I have nothing either. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for the input.